Why do people do truly terrible things to each other? Well, forever. We've had one word for it: evil. But what if that word isn't an answer? What if it's actually a roadblock? Today, we're going to dive into the work of psychologist Simon Baron-Cohen, who argues that science can give us a much better way to understand human cruelty. And for him, this whole journey started with a single, absolutely chilling memory. You know, the quest to understand something this huge often starts with a single jarring moment. For the author, this was it. This one sentence from his father. The image of human beings being turned into objects, it sparked a lifelong mission to figure out the mechanics behind that kind of dehumanization. And really, that is the central mystery, isn't it? It goes way beyond just one historical event. It gets right to the heart of this bizarre paradox of being human. How can we be capable of such deep love and connection, and at the same time, such profound cruelty? How does a mind even get there? And this gets to the core problem with using the word evil. It might feel right, it might feel satisfying to label something that way, but it doesn't actually explain a single thing. It's a full stop. It's a word that just shuts down our curiosity and stops us from asking the much more important questions about what's actually happening psychologically. Okay, so if evil is the dead end, then what's the path forward? Well, the proposal here is to replace it with a scientific concept: empathy erosion. And this is where the real investigation begins. Empathy erosion is the whole game. The idea is that this isn't some supernatural force. No, it's a psychological mechanism that gets switched off. When our empathy erodes, we stop seeing another person's feelings, and we start seeing them as a thing, an it instead of a you. And that simple shift is the absolute prerequisite for cruelty. But how does this empathy circuit in our brains actually work? Is it something you either have or you don't? Well, according to this theory, it's way more nuanced than that. It's less like a light switch and a lot more like a spectrum. So first, let's get our terms straight. Empathy isn't just feeling what someone else feels. It's actually a two-step process. First, there's the recognition part, being able to figure out what someone else is thinking or feeling. Then there's the response part, feeling an appropriate emotion in return. You really need both for the circuit to be complete. So, the big argument here is that we've been thinking about empathy all wrong. It's not this binary thing. It's not a light switch that's just on or off. Instead, think of it like this. Every single one of us has an empathy dimmer switch. For some people, it's naturally turned up really high. For others, it's set a bit lower. And for all of us, that setting can change based on things like stress or fear or even who we think is on our team. The point is, we all exist somewhere on this continuum. And if you were to plot this out across the whole population, it would look just like a classic bell curve. Most of us are clumped right here in the middle, with pretty average levels of empathy. But just like any human trait, you have people out on the extreme ends, some with exceptionally high empathy, and others way down at the other end, with profoundly low levels. Which, of course, leads us to the most critical question in this whole thing. What's going on at the absolute bottom of that bell curve? What does a life with zero empathy actually look like? And this is where the theory takes a really fascinating and honestly unexpected turn. Because it turns out that 0 degrees of empathy isn't just one single category. It can show up in two very, very different ways. First, you've got what's called zero negative. This is what we all tend to think of, people with conditions like psychopathy, where that lack of empathy leads directly to harmful, cruel behavior. But then, and this is the big twist, there's zero positive. This describes people, often with conditions like Asperger's, who also lack that emotional empathy but are not cruel at all. In fact, their minds are often brilliantly wired for something else entirely: systemizing. So you might be asking, wait a minute, how can you have a moral code if you don't have empathy? The answer is logic. Zero positive people often build their entire understanding of right and wrong not on feeling, but on a deep analytical grasp of rules, fairness, and consistent principles. Their morality is based on a system, and it can be incredibly strong. Okay, so this raises another huge question. Where do our personal empathy levels even come from? Are we just born with them, or is it something we learn? Well, studies on identical and fraternal twins have given us a pretty startling number. Research suggests that the emotional part of empathy, that response part, is estimated to be about 68% heritable. That is a massive genetic influence, which tells us our baseline empathy level is pretty strongly shaped by our DNA. But, and this is a huge but, genes are not the whole story. You see, it takes more than just a harsh environment to create a psychopath. Your environment is the other absolutely essential piece of the puzzle. If you have a genetic predisposition for low empathy and you combine that with an abusive or neglectful childhood, well, that's a powerful and dangerous combination. It's the interaction between nature and nurture that's key. And this really speaks to the power of nurture. A secure, loving bond with a caregiver in those first few years of life, it acts as this kind of emotional foundation. The author calls it an internal pot of gold that gives a child the building blocks for healthy empathy. And when that's missing, the consequences can be devastating. All right, so what do we do with all this? Why does it even matter if we shift our perspective from evil to empathy? Let's try and bring it all home. So this new framework really gives us a 4-step shift in how we think. First, we throw out the dead-end term evil and replace it with a testable mechanism, empathy erosion. Second, we start to see empathy not as a switch, but as a dimmer, a spectrum that we're all on. Third, and this is so important, we realize that zero empathy doesn't automatically mean bad. We have to distinguish between zero negative and zero positive. And finally, we accept that our capacity for empathy is this complex dance between our genes and our life experiences. And this is the ultimate takeaway. In a world that's so full of conflict and misunderstanding, empathy isn't just some nice, fluffy, soft skill. It is the fundamental resource that makes society possible. It's the glue. It's what allows us to solve problems, to build bridges, and to just treat each other like human beings. And that leaves us with this final, and I think, very hopeful question. If cruelty is the result of an empathy circuit that's broken, or just underdeveloped, then it's no longer this unsolvable, mystical problem of evil. It's a real-world problem. And just like other problems with the brain, it raises the incredible possibility that we can actually find ways to protect, to repair, and maybe even to strengthen this most valuable resource we have.